Today's training will hopefully be both insightful and engaging, and we will be offering a Budget 102 follow-up session to this in the spring at some point after we get through budget certification. As far as our outline for this afternoon, today's training will cover a range of topics that include different components of the budget, development of the base budget and the change budget, the Final Appropriations Act, an application of the State Budget Act, and then the State Budget Manual. The next slide, I think. OSBM. So if you're here this afternoon, it's likely that you have some sort of interface with our office, our analysts, and our staff. But do you really know what OSBM does and why we're here? So the major functions of OSBM include the following. We provide fiscal oversight to the governor, as well as work with the governor to prepare his recommended budget, apply state law and policy in the administration of the budget. We also publish the State Budget Manual, which includes the State Budget Act, policies, budget preparation, administration, travel, and other matters. Our office also forecasts and monitors state revenues. We conduct management analysis when requested by the legislator or agencies. And we also produce official population estimates for the state, counties, and municipalities. And we also have staff here that staff the Council of Internal Audit. Next slide. Organizationally, our office here at OSBM is within the office of the governor. The governor actually appoints the state budget director who leads OSBM. And we provide nonpartisan fiscal advice to the governor and the budget director. We also provide administrative continuity and institutional knowledge on prior budgets and prior policy decisions. And OSBM develops the governor's recommended budget when we try to be as consistent with the governor's goals and his agenda. And lastly, OSBM executes the budget as enacted by the General Assembly, interpreted by the governor, and in compliance with state law. Next slide. As far as how our office is structured, there are two sections of our office that you will likely encounter if you are in this training today or interface with our office, and that is the budget development section or the budget execution section. The budget development section works closely with agencies and staff to develop the governor's budget, to certify the budget as enacted by the General Assembly, and assist agencies with strategic planning and performance management. The budget execution section, which is the section that I oversee, we develop the base budget, and we usually work very closely with agencies on monitoring your budgets in terms of revenue and spending, helping you do revisions to your budget that are within state law and policy. And we also conduct year-end carry forward and closeout. So that's just a general overview of our office. And if you've got questions, I think at the very end of the presentation, there's a slide that gives all of our contact information and which analysts are assigned to which agencies. And to that, I will pass it on over to James Robinson. James is a team lead on the budget execution section.
All right, thanks, Casey. Good afternoon, everyone. As Casey said, my name is James Robinson. I am the team lead for the Justice and Public Safety and Education team on the budget execution side of OSBM. In this afternoon session, I will be covering the different parts of the budget as well as the base budget. But first, I would like to start with some background about the state constitution, the State Budget Act, the State Budget Manual, and review with you some common terms that you'll hear throughout today's presentation. So starting with the Constitution, I think it's really helpful when discussing the budget to ground it in constitutional and statutory authority provided to the governor to both prepare a recommended budget and administer the budget passed by the General Assembly. Article 3, Section 5 of the North Carolina Constitution directs the governor to prepare and recommend a budget to the General Assembly, administer the budget enacted by the General Assembly, and very importantly, maintain a balanced budget throughout the year. Next slide, please. The State Budget Act states that the governor is the director of the budget, but may delegate authority, and states that the governor must clearly distinguish the base budget reductions, eliminations, expansions, new programs, and specifies the ways in which the base budget may be developed. And we're going to look at that in detail today. Next slide, please. Budget manual is found on OSBM's website under the Budget tab, and the budget manual page is broken down into sections, as you can see from the screenshots on this slide. The budget manual outlines budget policies in plain language. Those policies are derived directly from authority found in the State Budget Act and other applicable statutes. The budget manual summarizes the budget development process and sets parameters for budget execution. It's designed to be a one-stop resource for all things budget in North Carolina, and it also includes a glossary of common terms. The next couple slides will review some of those. So starting with the biennium. The biennium is the two fiscal years beginning on July 1 of each odd-numbered year. The certified budget is the budget enacted by the General Assembly, plus allowable changes in General Statute 143C 1-1 D7. And the authorized budget is composed of the certified budget plus allowable internal revisions and revisions approved by OSBM. We think of the authorized budget as the working budget. Next slide, please. So continuing with some further terms, a general fund budget code contains the general fund budgets for each agency and university. A fund code is a group of objects or line items within a budget code that support a specific activity. The base budget or worksheet 1, we use those pretty interchangeably, those two terms, is the budget necessary to continue the current level of services in the next biennium, and the change budget includes increases or decreases made to the base budget during the budget development process. I know some of these slides, really these last two slides, are very text heavy, but as Dana said, you can click back and forth between them, so you can use these as a reference guide. And I think you've even got a PDF version of this, so you can always go back and take a look at this as a reference at some point in the future. So I'll just very briefly mention the Uniform Chart of Accounts, but I won't go into detail. This is really OSC's area of expertise. But I will say that the base budget is constructed at the account level using the Uniform Chart of Accounts. I think that's what's important to know for today. OSC maintains the Uniform Chart of Accounts, and new accounts are created through OSC. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about the different components of the budget. General Statute 143C 3-5 details the components of the recommended budget. Included is the base budget, which we'll dig into in the next few slides, and the change budget, which will be reviewed in detail later today. The base budget also includes, per this definition in the State Budget Act, capital and IT budgets. But we actually won't be reviewing those today. We will save those for a later training as they're sort of their own thing. So we're just going to look at the base budget and worksheet 2 or expansion budget, change budget process today. The next two slides are designed to give you a picture of the entire biennial budget process. Here is an outline of the long session timeline. It begins around August of even years with budget instructions, which are followed by the process of adjusting the base budget or worksheet 1, and the worksheet 2 process, which builds the change budget. The next few minutes before we break will be focused on the base budget development process. Next slide, please. The short session timeline follows a similar process with a couple of key differences. The base budget is not adjusted prior to the short session, and the timeline for developing the change budget is somewhat condensed, beginning with instructions around December of odd years. And I'll emphasize that we don't adjust the base budget prior to the short session. This is really sort of fundamental to the fact that we have a biennial budget process. We only adjust that base budget at the beginning of a new biennium, and then in the second year of the biennium, when we're going through a short session, we're only making adjustments to the budget that was passed in the prior long session, which does not require going through the base budget process a second time. All right. Next slide, please. So moving on to the base budget. First, we're going to talk a little bit about base budget instructions. OSBM kicks off the base budget development process by sending out budget development instructions, which set parameters for budget development and provide job aids for the technical processes involved. All of this information is posted to OSBM's website under the Budget tab. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you really, it drills down into a part of the diagram I showed you dealing with long session several slides back. So this drills down into that base budget part of that diagram. Developing the base budget really begins with the certification of the current year budget. After certification, the authorized budget may be adjusted and will become the starting point for any adjustments in the base budget. It's key to remember that changes to the authorized budget are generally net zero, meaning they do not impact appropriation. Around November of even years, agencies submit Worksheet 1 adjustments to the base budget. These adjustments are submitted in IBIS and hit the increase-decrease columns of the Worksheet 1 report, which we'll take a close look at in a couple of slides. The base budget process also includes updating fund purpose statements and fund restructuring. And the base budget is finalized in December of even years. Remember, we don't adjust the base budget before a short session. The base budget process really is designed to ensure that the budget projects expenditures and receipts as closely as possible to what we actually experience in the next biennium. This is really, I think, one of the major takeaways that we want people to have from the base budget process. We're trying to project expenditures and receipts so that in the new biennium, we don't have to revise the budget as much as we otherwise might. Part of this base budget process is really reducing our workload over the next year because we're trying to set everything up as it should look before the new biennium begins. Next slide, please. So authority to make adjustments. Let's talk some about the base budget and the authority that we have to adjust the base budget. 143C 1-1D1C of the State Budget Act spells out specifically the authority state agencies and OSBM have to change the base budget. Base budget provides the funding necessary to continue the existing authorized level of services for the next biennium. And the base budget is presented in the Worksheet 1 report. And again, I'll note that we use that Worksheet 1 term in two different ways. One is to refer to a Worksheet 1 entry that we make in IBIS that adjusts the base budget, and then the Worksheet 1 report, which is the base budget itself. Next slide, please. So I'll provide a hint here on the next couple of slides. There will be a lot of answers to questions you'll see in this first breakout session. So if you want to flag these slides somehow or take a screenshot of the next couple slides, it will probably be useful for you later. So 143C 1-1D1C defines a base budget, as we said on the last slide. It consists of the prior year authorized budget and the following changes outlined in law. Annualization of programs and positions, reductions to adjust for items funded on a non-recurring basis, increases to adjust for non-recurring reductions, adjustments to federal payroll tax changes. You can go to the next slide. So rate increases in accordance with the terms of existing leases of real property, adjustments for receipt projections, reconciliation of intragovernmental or intergovernmental transfers that require no net general fund increase, adjustments for statutory appropriations or other adjustments directed by the General Assembly, reconciliation of salary-related employer contribution, longevity, and special separation allowances under Article 12D of Chapter 143. I'll note that the underlined text that you see on this slide are actually changes that are in this most recent budget bill, Senate Bill 105, which is now Session Law 2021-180. Next slide, please. So let's start talking about Worksheet 1 entries and the Worksheet 1 report. This slide provides a screenshot of the Worksheet 1 report accessible in IBIS. The increase-decrease columns change the prior year authorized budget. These are changes that reflect the adjustments made through Worksheet 1 entries in IBIS. Recurring budget revisions can be pulled into the Worksheet 1, but are reflected in the prior year authorized budget. And we'll talk some about that in a few slides. Next slide, please. So this is a Worksheet 1 reversal of a non-recurring certification item. Worksheet 1s are filled out in IBIS, but non-recurring certification reversals are automatically generated in IBIS. Some of the key components of a Worksheet 1 entry include the budget cycle, the budget code, the title. I think it's very, very key that really anything a revision or a Worksheet 1 entry or a certification entry in IBIS have a good title, because we use the titles to search IBIS for prior entries. The justification is also very key. There are a number of elements to a good justification, but I think it's most important that it start by outlining the authority to change the base budget. That is for a Worksheet 1 entry. It's important to outline the authority to change the base budget. OSBM analysts are trained to first ask what authority exists to make this adjustment. This example provides the non-recurring conference report item that is being backed out of the base budget. So it correctly lists the authority that we have to change the base budget in this case. What is happening on the sheet, what you can see is that additional civil penalty receipts provided to the State Public School Fund within the Department of Public Instruction on a non-recurring basis are being backed out. So the impact is a net increase to state appropriation because requirements are not changing. So we're collecting fewer receipts, but requirements are not changing. That means there's a net increase in appropriation because requirements minus receipts equals appropriation. Next slide, please. All right, so this slide shows the change reflected on the Worksheet 1 report in the increase-decrease column in both years of the biennium. If you click again, there's a little blue arrow that comes up that will point it out. There it is. There's our 31.3 million. Because there was no change again in requirements, this results in a 31.3 million increase in state appropriation. So in the last two slides, you saw the Worksheet 1 entry as it was filled out in IBIS, and now you see that change after that Worksheet 1 entry was approved. You see that change reflected in the Worksheet 1 report, which again is the base budget document. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some other adjustments that we make during the base budget. Recurring revisions can also be pulled into the base budget that make adjustments authorized in the State Budget Act or elsewhere in law. These include adjustments based on projections of receipt collections in the new biennium, allocations of reserves, and technical corrections for things like negative budgets. These adjustments change the authorized budget and do not show up in the increase-decrease column of the Worksheet 1. They also have to be manually pulled into the base budget by OSBM analysts. So what you see there in the screenshot is the tool in IBIS that OSBM analysts will use to search for revisions that may be currently excluded from the base budget, but we might want to pull into the base budget. And then through that tool, we indicate whether or not the revision should be in or out of the base budget. Next slide, please. Adjustments are also made to fund purpose statements in IBIS. Agencies begin this process by reviewing the Fund Purpose Statement report found in the IBIS Reports folder. The location of the report is shown there on the slide. The report generated is an Excel spreadsheet showing each fund purpose statement by budget code. Adjustments are submitted to OSBM, and OSBM analysts make the adjustment in IBIS. Changes are made to reflect things like restructuring of an agency budget or changes to the nature of the programs within a fund. So we want to make sure that the information that we have describing what goes on in a fund, what kind of budget activity goes on in a fund, stays current and stays relevant. So that's why we go through that fund purpose statement process during the base budget. Next slide, please. So the completed base budget is used by the governor and the General Assembly so that there is a common starting point. So everybody's working from the same start. The base budget is sent to the Fiscal Research Division, at which time the Fiscal Research Division reviews, asks questions, and may decide to make adjustments to the base budget. Next slide. So the base budget is law now, right? Not quite yet, almost. The General Assembly can change the base budget, as I just noted. The base budget becomes law only after being appropriated by the General Assembly. It is appropriated through the Appropriations Act, and you can see the special provision on your screen there that appropriates the base budget for FY 21-23 in Session Law 2021-180, the appropriations bill that was just signed into law by the governor within the last several weeks. So this time I think we're going to stop and take questions if you have it.